the leaves are eaten by rabbits, which are eaten by foxes, but also the leaves could be eaten by deer, or the leaves could be eaten by mice. The leaves could be eaten by insects, which could be eaten by birds, and so when you do all these food chains together, all the lines crisscross, it looks like a spider web, so they call it a food web. Are you getting this up here too? Notice the arrows show the direction that the energy flows. So energy goes from the leaves to the rabbits to the foxes. This shows some decomposers down here that are eating the organisms when they die. And there are things that eat the decomposers. And so we call this bottom part a detritus food chain. Showing where the dead stuff goes. But eventually everything is decomposed by these fungi and bacteria. That's what these little things are supposed to be, bacteria. It's a general rule of thumb that every step you go up a food chain, you lose about 90% of the energy. 90%? 90%.
Wow.
Only 10% of the energy is kept in the organisms. Meaning if this fish eats 100 pounds of plant material in its lifetime, most of that plant material is going to be burned up in the fish's normal everyday activities, and only 10 pounds of fish will be left. You see what I'm saying? At each level, most of the food that you eat gets burned up. It doesn't turn into biomass. It doesn't turn into the bodies of the organisms at the next level. For instance, if you eat a 1 pound steak, are you going to gain 1 pound? No, because you're running around doing your activities, cheerleading, or whatever you like to do. And you burn that up. And so you stay about the same weight. Maybe you gain some weight, but most of the energy is burned up in normal activities. And so that's why if you count it, if you weighed the herbivores in an ecosystem, they weigh a lot less than the level below them. The herbivores here weigh 37 grams per square meter. A square meter is about as big as this box. So for this undersea community, for every square meter, there's about 37 grams of herbivores, but gosh, there were 809 grams of autotrophs. So why is that? Why are there so few herbivores? It's because the herbivores have to do activities with their body and burn most of the energy that they get from the first level. What were you going to ask?
Was that like why the food chain ends eventually?
Yes, that's good. That's correct. That's why the food chain ends eventually.
Yes, there's not a predator over predator over predator.
Yeah, it can't go up forever because there's just not enough energy left.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The top predators in the food chain, they often have to travel long distances to get food just to get enough just to support their few small numbers.
Yeah.
And you got to have enough numbers for genetic diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So you're limited in the amount of levels a food chain can have. Usually you don't see more than about 5 or 6 levels. That's the most. And often it's only a couple, 2, 3 levels. It depends on the production. If it's a really productive area like a marsh or a rainforest, you'll have more levels. Mm-hmm. If it's a non-productive area like a desert, you're going to have very few levels in your food chain.
Makes sense.
Are y'all with me here? Let me give you an example of a question, how they might test your knowledge of this on the AP exam. You got a problem. You're the governor of a territory, and your population is very large. What would be the best way to feed your large population? A, take the land that you have and grow rice on it and let everybody eat rice. Or B, take the land that you have grow grass on it, put cows on it, let the cows eat the grass, and let the people eat cow meat. Which is a better way to feed your population that's very large? And
Rice.
Say.
Eat the rice, because then you're going to have to grow grass, and then you're going to have to grow cow, and then since cows are eating grass, and they have less nutrients.
There's less mass for you to actually eat.
cows are going around eating all the grass, and they're doing their everyday activities, whatever cow sex or whatever they do, and they're burning it all up.
There's more energy.
There's more energy if you do it with rice. That's why Chinese eat rice.
Really?
There's so many of them.
Does that mean you eat a cow?
That's why cows are sacred in India.
Oh yeah.
It's not a good way to do it, to eat meat. If you have a big population, you eat plants. That's not really why cows are. Well, I mean, that's probably why cows are sacred in India. It's a religious thing, but it's probably why it's like that. Yeah.
If you eat a pound of steak or a pound of rice, would you get more energy out of the rice?
No, not necessarily. But to make that pound of steak, you had to have probably about 40 pounds of plants that cow ate. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
The density kind of.
And 40 pounds of rice is a lot more calories than 1 pound of steak.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you'd want to do the plants instead of the meat. Most people, the way I asked that question, was on an AP exam not too long ago, and most people missed it. Because they think, oh, steak is nutritious, eat steak. They don't. You got to understand how much went into making that steak. A lot.
That's why we should be vegetarians. Oh.
I mean, if you can afford it,
Yeah, true.
you can eat steak. But a lot of places don't have enough land to make that much steak. Okay, see if you can follow this. This is, although the guy talks in a boring voice, it's great information about ecological pyramids. You'll probably get everything you need to know just out of this video with ecological pyramids. We call that, by the way, we call this an ecological pyramid, showing the sizes of each food level. It's called a trophic level is what we call it. Did I just put, no.
Yeah, you put disable all.
Dang it. I hate when I do stuff like that.
Now, why does it ask you in the first place?
I don't know.
I was wondering about that.
There's probably a way you can.
So what are the trophic levels?
What's that?
What are the trophic levels?
Trophic levels are different levels of that pyramid. We call this, we call this the first trophic level, the second trophic level, the third trophic level, fourth trophic level. You see what I'm saying? Yeah? It's still not doing it?
Yeah. You probably have to quit the whole thing.
I thought I did.
Not the whole thing.
Computer, back when I was a kid, you wrote on a chalkboard, and we loved it. No one understood anything. We still got through life. Alright. Try this again. Enable all. It's not recommended.
And ecological.
Oh wait, that's not even the one I wanted to watch. This is it. Oops. I'm having trouble, aren't I?
An ecosystem is a stable ecological unit composed of a living biotic component of interacting organisms and a non-living abiotic component that consists of physical factors of non-living parts of the environment. To be maintained, an ecosystem must have a steady input of energy. The source of energy for most ecosystems is the sun. The sun's energy is trapped and then transferred from one organism to another. The sequence of organisms through which energy and nutrients flow is a food chain. The food chain begins with plants, which are the producers in the food chain. During photosynthesis, plants use the sun's energy to produce sugars.
What's happening?
Your tape isn't working.
Organic compounds from the atoms found in their environment. Thus, in our example, plants are the first class of organisms to capture energy entering the ecosystem and use it for growth and reproduction. In relation to this flow of energy, the plants are classified as trophic level 1. The energy in trophic level 1 can be transferred to other organisms when the plants are consumed. The animals that eat producers, such as plants, can be referred to as primary consumers. Primary consumers make up trophic level 2 in the food chain. Mice are the primary consumers in our example. Animals called predators get their energy by eating other animals. A predator, such as a snake, becomes a secondary consumer when it eats a mouse who was a primary consumer. Secondary consumers make up trophic level 3. The animals in the third trophic level are often food for other predators. In our example, hawks prey on the snakes and thus form trophic level 4. They are the top predator in this food chain since no other predator eats them. So in this example, the food chain consists of 4 trophic levels. As energy passes from one trophic level to the next, approximately 90% is lost. This flow and loss can be expressed as an ecological pyramid. Ecological pyramids may represent either the number of organisms, the biomass, or the amount of energy found.
Oops. Cut off early.
Well, that was very informative.
Make sense?
How did they like figure out it was 90%?
Well, if you take the number of autotrophs in the system and weigh them, you take the number of herbivores and weigh them, total it up, it's about 90%.
Yeah, actually, it gave a formula, I thought. It said something like,
Or you can measure the energy that's in the organisms using a calorimeter. Calorimeter is where you burn the organisms up in an oven that measures exactly how much heat comes out. And if you measure the amount of energy that comes out of all the autotrophs in an area, and the amount of energy that comes out of all the herbivores in an area, it'll be about 90%, or there'll be about 90% more energy in the first level than the next level.
I think it said
10 times as much. Yeah.
I think it says organisms multiplied by biomass is the number of organisms multiplied by the dry weight of the organic matter within one organism.
Okay.
Is that kind of
Right.
what it is? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They use dry weight because water doesn't carry any calories. It's just water.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of organisms are a lot water. So you got to measure the dry weight to get the amount of calories.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to cycling. You ever heard of the cycle before?
Like a unicycle?
This shows the water cycle. And the water cycle is a discussion of how water kind of circulates in the environment and where it goes. I mean, we know the oceans are full of water, and water evaporates from the oceans and floats through the air and forms the clouds. Did you know clouds were made of water? And then the clouds will blow over the land and rain down on the land, and some of the water will collect in lakes, and some of the water will run off back into the oceans and rivers, and some of the water goes into the ground and stays into the ground. There are huge amounts of water in the ground we call aquifers. And if you ever heard of a well, you just drill down and stick a pipe in there. It's under high pressure, so it comes shooting up out of the pipe. And now you have nice fresh water that's been actually cleaned as it percolates down through the soil. So that's kind of the water cycle.
So it's drinkable?
Yeah, it is.
But you can't use too much of it or it'll dry up. Right?
The aquifers will eventually dry up as we use them. So the water that came in this water bottle, how old is it? How old is that water right there at the bottom?
Since the beginning of the universe.
Very old, yeah. It could be billions of years old. Maybe not the beginning of the universe, but when the last supernova happened that released all the hydrogen and oxygen. Yeah, that's old. This water can be billions of years old. It just circulates. This water may have been in the gut of a dinosaur at one time. Good. Dinosaur gut water.
Like Bear Grylls.
Now, let's look at a different cycle. Let's look at the carbon cycle.
Another animal.
The carbon cycle is very important to us because carbon is the molecule that makes most of the organic molecules, makes up all the organic molecules in the body. Much of them are made of carbon. Remember about carbon? What was the important thing about carbon that was different than almost any other atom?
It's in group 4.
Meaning what?
It neither gains nor loses electrons. It didn't have a complete shell, right?
No,
Is that no?
that's not it.
Because it could link to like 4 things or something.
Do it, Dante.
Oh, well, that's
Carbon can link to 4 different things.
What's what it means, right? Group 4?
Yeah?
Okay.
Meaning it has 4 electrons in its outer level that it can share. And so carbon tends to bond and make very large molecules. And this can get very complicated, and it can get so complicated that it can store information and carries lots of energy and all these bonds. So carbon is a very useful atom. So we're interested in carbon. And carbon exists just floating around in the atmosphere. The simplest form of carbon, are you with me, Emery? Simplest form of carbon is CO2, carbon dioxide. And it's just floating around in the air right now. About 0.1% of the air is carbon dioxide. It's just floating around.
How do we breathe it out?
Yeah, you breathe it out. And I'll get to that in a minute. But the carbon dioxide can be taken in by plants in a process we call photosynthesis. So the carbon dioxide can go into the body of the plant during photosynthesis, and now the carbon is in the body of the plant. It's actually making up the plant itself. The plant, its branches, all its cells, the cellulose in its cell walls are all made of carbon, you see. That's now been fixed, is what we call it. It's been taken into the plant and fixed into molecules in the plant's body. So that plant is mostly carbon. And that carbon was once in the air. So where do we get our carbon from?
We eat.
We eat the plant, and now the carbon is in the body of the animal. And I don't know, is that a little animal that eats carbon?
Looks like it. Yeah, it looks like a
Little dog or something? I don't know what that is.
looks like a
Cat?
yeah, it looks like it.
So the animals eat the plants. So all the carbon in your body came from eating plants. Or you ate animals that ate plants. If you ate steak, you're eating a cow. The cow ate grass. Are you with me? Now, the animals can put back a lot of what they eat. A lot of the carbon that they eat goes back into the air during the process of respiration. Emily Kate, this is what you were just talking about. Your cells do respiration, your mitochondrions. They break down the food, and it is eventually breathed out of you. So, I just breathed some of the food I ate at lunch out at you. Are you offended? It's carbon dioxide now, and it's floating around in the air. And every breath you breathe out, so that's part of the carbon cycle there. In through photosynthesis, out through respiration. The plants do respiration too, by the way. They can do it directly. Plants have mitochondrions that can put out carbon dioxide. Okay? Y'all seem to be falling asleep here. You need to understand what you're talking about. Is that Lee? Are you here? So we have this photosynthesis carbon in, respiration carbon out. Now it can get more advanced than that. The plants and animals can die and become buried and become part of the soil. And that carbon will sit in the soil, but it will eventually decay. Bacteria will break it down and decay, and it will come back out of the soil eventually and back into the atmosphere. All those dead leaves and stuff that are in the ground, they'll eventually be torn up by bacteria and fungi, and that carbon goes back into the atmosphere.
Or it turns into coal, right?
Now, it can happen where the dead organisms are buried so deeply and at such a high pressure that they never decompose. And that's how coal and oil and natural gas are formed. Buried plants and animals that have been underground millions of years, and there's no oxygen down there as deep as they are, and they'll just never decompose. And so if you dig up oil, that's just old dead, it's mostly algae from old bogs that never was able to decompose because it was buried deeply and buried where no oxygen could get down there so that the bacteria couldn't ever break it down. That's what oil is. If we pull the coal out of the ground and pump the oil out of the ground and burn it in factories like it's showing here or in cars, then the burning puts the carbon dioxide back in the atmosphere. You getting all this, Jessica? That's what global warming is. Global warming is the idea that we're taking all this buried carbon that used to be underground in solid form, and we're putting it into the air, and we're thickening the atmosphere this way. The atmosphere is thicker now than it used to be because of all the oil and natural gas and coal that we've burned. And it's not somebody's idea, and it might be wrong, and it might be right. It's absolutely right. It's physically impossible not to be right. Because if you burn coal and oil and natural gas, you're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The atmosphere gets thicker, it traps more heat, and the world gets hotter.
How would you
You can test this at the smallest levels in the lab and see. If you pump more carbon dioxide into a little chamber, into a little aquarium, that aquarium is going to get hotter than the next one right beside it. That's just the way it is. So that's the carbon cycle. Now, a big part of the carbon cycle is the oceans, Emery. The oceans can absorb a lot of the carbon that's into the atmosphere. A lot of the carbon from the atmosphere, the CO2, goes into the oceans and combines with the water in the oceans, chemically combines with water in the oceans to form a substance called bicarbonate, which is also commonly known as baking soda. There's baking soda dissolved in the oceans, and a lot of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere goes there. And it causes the oceans to actually become a little bit more acidic. And the oceans gradually, over the last 100 or 200 years, have become more acidic, and corals and fish are having a hard time living in that acidic environment. And that's one of the reasons why there's not as many fish in the sea as there used to be. You know how many fish are left in the sea compared to what there were 200 years ago? I know you know, Stephanie. You remember the percentage? We studied it in marine biology.
I remember studying it, but I don't remember the exact number.
10%?
It's about 10%.
No.
There's only about 10% of the fish left in the sea now, as there used to be.
Species or just
Fish in
Species
general.
and number.
Fish. Oh.
Yeah.
Is that because
EKF, does that shock you? It doesn't, because you don't know what I'm talking about.
Right. So is that mostly overfishing, or is that?
It's a combination.
Yeah.
Overfishing, pollution,
Hypoxic
loss of
zones.
habitat, loss of marshes.
Mm-hmm.
We're filling in the marshes where they lay their eggs.
Lack of oxygen in the water.
Because hotter water has less oxygen, right?
Water has less oxygen than on land, but I don't know if oxygen in the water has gone down greatly recently.
What about like the hypoxic zones and stuff?
Yeah, that's
That
true.
kills all the
That's
fish.
true. Runoff from fertilizers causes algae growth. You're right. Yeah.
I mean, warm water holds less oxygen than cold water, right? It's warm.
That's correct.
So
That's
probably a
correct.
problem,
That's
yeah.
another reason, yeah. Everybody stand up real quick. There you go. Turn around in a circle.
I don't want to sit.
Now sit back down. Something's wrong with you guys today.
I'm paying attention.
I told them to put sleeping pills in the food in the cafeteria, but didn't want them to do it before my class.
I actually ate my own lunch.
This, this is the phosphorus cycle. The book also talks about, and there's all sorts of every different type of nutrient cycles: carbon cycles, phosphorus cycles, nitrogen cycles. The nitrogen cycle is a big one. They talk about it on 878.
Let's talk about both.
I'm just going to do nitrogen. I don't really have time for the other one. Look at all these arrows. It's a lot to understand. Okay? Let me just give you the basics of it. Okay? If you're not listening right now, you have to wade through all this on your own. What's important? I'm telling you right now. Nitrogen exists in our atmosphere as N2. Almost 80% of the air is nitrogen. Not oxygen, nitrogen. That's what this is. And that nitrogen, we use it in our cells, but we can't get it directly from the air. What it has to do, it has to be taken into the soil through a process called nitrogen fixation. That's what this is, number one. Nitrogen is pulled into the soil. It actually floats through in the air. It floats down here in the soil. There are bacteria that take the nitrogen from the air and can break it apart and use it. And the bacteria in the soil change the nitrogen in the atmosphere into NH4, which is called ammonium, and NO2, which is called nitrite, and eventually into NO3, which is called nitrate. That's what these bacteria do. They're called nitrifying bacteria. And they take nitrogen from the atmosphere and make it into nitrate.
How do they do that?
They have complicated enzyme pathways that can do it.
Yeah.
But it's the nitrate that plants can use. So the plants can then pull the nitrate out of the soil and use it to grow. And plants make amino acids for their proteins and make nucleotides for their DNA, which all contain nitrogen. They make it from this nitrate. And then how do we get our nitrogen, do you think? Very nice, EKF. We eat the plant. Look at this giant rabbit. It's way bigger than these cars and trucks. It had to eat a lot of nitrogen to get so big. And this guy's coming around the corner, he's going, oh my gosh, this giant rabbit. So that's mostly the nitrogen cycle. When plants and animals die, they're decomposed and the nitrogen that's in their bodies goes back to NH4, which is converted back to nitrate. So this cycle just goes on and on. That's most of the nitrogen cycle.
What's that thing at the bottom? Are those like fish that are around the ocean?
Here?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are fish.
Don't they have a lot of nitrogen?
They have
nitrogen.
their wastes have a lot of nitrogen. It'll build up in a fish tank.
Ammonia. And
Yeah.
it is diluted.
That's right.
Urea.
Like
We have urea, they have ammonia.
Yeah. So amino acids have that nitrogen part.
Amino acids need the nitrogen, yeah.
Yeah.
To build an amino acid, you gotta have nitrogen. To build a nucleotide, you gotta have nitrogen. Sugar, phosphate, nitrogen base. Remember that? Nitrogen. So, all these other arrows here show that, nitrogen can come out of the soil and go back into the atmosphere. There are special bacteria that will do that. They're called denitrifying bacteria.
Denitrifying?
Yeah, and what they do is they take that oxygen that's in the nitrate molecule, and they use it. And the nitrogen goes back into the atmosphere.
Wait, so they use what?
See that molecule there?
Yeah.
It's got oxygen in it.
Yeah.
And there are some bacteria that want that oxygen. So they'll take the oxygen away, and you're just left with the nitrogen, and that floats back up into the atmosphere.
So there's nitrifying bacteria, which make nitrate, and denitrate.
You're on it, which turn it back into the atmosphere. The denitrifying bacteria will go to work if there's no oxygen in the soil. This is why you have to plow your fields. The farmer plows the field to get oxygen in the soil so that the denitrifying bacteria will not need that oxygen. And the nitrate will stay in the soil. If you don't plow your field, the field becomes too packed, no oxygen left in the soil, and then those denitrifying bacteria steal all the oxygen from the nitrate, and now the plants can't grow. That's why you plow your fields. You may not have known why you plow your fields before. Now you know. And this big blue arrow is important. Humans can take nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn it into fertilizer, and then dump it in the soil. A lot of the nitrate in our soils today comes from human activities.
Yeah. That's like farmers use that as
Farmers,
fertilizer.
yeah. Okay, you guys were sleeping a lot of that time. That's not good.